Hi there, I'm Mark, and in this video we are going to have a look at the new responsive engine in Bubble. This is actually the second video in a three-part mini-series that I'm doing on this topic. So if you haven't seen the first video, now would be a good chance to do so, because what we are doing today will build upon the foundations that we have done in the first video. Overall, we are going to rebuild a professional-looking responsive website in Bubble. Alright, let's pick it up where we left off. So last time we have implemented this very basic but also very responsive page layout. And we will use this page layout to rebuild another page that you will see in a second, because now we are ready to actually start creating the content. So in order to do that, we will switch to the page that we're trying to rebuild, which is the Discord Nitro page here. So I'll just copy the header, and in order to get the fonts right and the font sizes, we can turn to the developer tools by pressing F12. You can then select the element. So here you can see that it's an H2 element, so it's a second level header. And by turning to the pane on the right hand side and by searching for font family, you can see the font family CSS properties. So for example, in that case, it's hidden behind a variable, but you can see that the font height is 800, and if we hover over the variable, you can see that the font sizes that are being applied here are, for example, also Arial, and Arial is available to us, so we will use that. Let's add a new text element, simply copy the original header here. We're going to remove the default style of the text element because, again, we are trying to rebuild it as good as possible. Font weight of 800. Then, of course, the font size needs to be bigger. And here you can see, well, something that is pretty annoying actually for all text elements. We got this default width of 200 pixels. We need to remove this here. We're going to make it a minimum width of 0 pixels so it can shrink as much as we need it to. And then we will also remove the minimum height. This has no visible effect right now, but trust me, it's going to be important. And we will also remove the line spacing, or at least make it a little bit smaller so that the lines are closer together and it looks like one consistent heading. Then we will center the text inside of the text element. So we will not center the text element itself in relation to its header. We will center the text inside of the element, and then we can switch to Layouts tab and try to center the text element itself by clicking here on this center button. Again, this does not have a visible effect because the text element stretches from one end to the other of the parent element. So it basically is already centered, but you will see with the next text element that this has an effect. So let's add it. This is 20 pixels, also Arial. So let's copy and paste it here. We'll remove the minimum width again, and also the minimum height. Here you can see the effects actually, right? So we will make the width fixed to the content, and this actually is the wrong content. So let's go back and copy it properly. Here we go. So remove the styling, make it Arial, 20 pixels, just like we saw. And now we can make this text element centered in relation to its parent element. So the parent element is the GRP header group, and the GRP header group has a container layout of column applied, right? So the main axis is the vertical one, and here we can determine the horizontal alignment of this text element, which is the cross axis in relation to the parent element. Now it's in the middle, of the horizontal axis. We'll add some margins to the bottom of the header element and rename it accordingly. I always like to use the txt prefix underscore. And here we've selected the header element, GRV header, which again is a column layout. And here we can determine the container alignment. And this alignment, this container alignment, only refers to the main axis of the container. So in that case, as I've explained before, when we have a column layout, we have a vertical axis as the main axis. If we had a row layout, we would have the horizontal axis as a main axis. So here we are going to determine that everything inside of that group will be centered along the vertical axis, just like that. All right. If you want to center something along the cross axis, along the horizontal axis, you need to select the element itself and then click on center. So let's have a look at how this behaves if you change the viewport width. Well, as you can see, it shrinks, but we need some more spacing between the text and our groups here. So yeah, I think we can just add some. So let's add some padding on the top. 50 pixels, basically on all sides. Now, let's see. Text shrinks, padding stays the same. And this does not look too good for smaller viewport widths, right? For example, here, text is too big and the padding is too big if we go below 768 pixels. So here it's obvious that it's far too big. So I think we need to apply some conditional layouts. And first we are going to do that for the GRP head element. We need to reduce the padding as soon as we go, let's say, as soon as the current page width is smaller than 768 pixels, which is that value here, right? This is just some kind of typical standard value. If we go below that width, we're going to reduce the top padding, the padding to the left-hand side, to the right-hand side, and to the bottom. So I will make the padding to the sides 10 pixels and the padding at the top and the bottom will be 15 pixels. This looks better, but of course the text needs to shrink accordingly. So we are going to basically apply the same condition as before. We're going to say if the current page width is smaller than 768 pixels, then the font size also needs to be smaller. This is too small. This looks good. So here, in order to save some time, we can do a little trick. Right click on the element, click on copy conditional formatting, and then paste conditional formatting to another element. So we will have the same condition here applied. But in that case, we need to reduce the font size a little bit. This looks good. Okay, so now if we go wider, if we go above 768 pixels, you will see the padding increase, here it was, and also the font size increase. And it also works the other way around. Okay, so we need to apply the same condition to the other groups on that page. So again, we can copy it and paste it. This should work. And finally, we are going to modify the layout of the page itself, because right now the width of the page, or the minimum width, is set to 0 pixels, so we can shrink it down to, well, 0 pixels, but we don't want that. We want to optimize it for a certain screen size. In that case, I usually use 320 pixels, which is the smallest screen size that is usually found in mobile devices. So as you can see, I can shrink it down, but I cannot go further than 320 pixels. And that should do it, at least for the header part. Now we can finally turn to the cards in the middle section. And as you can see, they are made of 3 different sections, which is a header section, the description, and an image at the bottom. Let's see. This is 20 pixels in size here. It's white color. It's the same font as before. And this is 16 pixels in size, also white color. So we'll replicate this. Every card in the middle section is represented by a group here. We will go for 250 pixels in width and 200 pixels in height, at least for now. And we can use the custom group setting that we have created in the first video. So we are now going to give this group a proper name. And then we can simply copy and paste it 6 times or 5 times so that we have 6 different cards. So as you can see, 4 cards fit next to each other into one row, but we cannot distinguish them, so we are going to apply some gap spacing between elements. And we can do 15 pixels of row gap and 15 pixels of column gap. And as soon as we have applied 15 pixels, you can see that there occurs a line break, or rather one card that has previously been on the first line will appear on the second line, because the space inside of the parent element, inside of GRP perks, is not wide enough to accommodate 4 cards of 250 pixels in size. Because as you might remember from the first video, we have made the middle section about 1000 pixels wide, maximum width of 1000 pixels. So we got 4 times 250 pixels, which is 1000 pixels. So as soon as there's some gap spacing between the cards, between the groups, then there will be a line break and the groups will continue on the next line. You see that? Now there's 4 in a row and then there's 3 in a row. Okay, let's see how this behaves if we change the viewport width. If we go smaller, then let's see, we got 3 times 250 pixels, which is 750 pixels, plus 50 plus 15 is 780 pixels. So if we go below 780 pixels in width now, this group here should switch to the next line, and this group here should also switch to the next line. Let's see if this really is the case, and in fact it works. So this is responsiveness out of the box. As you can see here, we don't have a padding right now because, well, the groups, they don't have any space between themselves and the outer element. And this has to do with the fact that we have simply copied the conditional formatting before. We didn't copy any padding. So let's add that padding here. And now we can see the conditional formatting in action, right? So there's line break, and since we've gone smaller than 768 pixels, the padding has been reduced accordingly. Even though 50 pixels is still visible here, the condition has applied the conditional formatting and the padding has been reduced accordingly. And this also works if we go smaller, up to 320 pixels. So that looks pretty good already, but apparently, well, the cards could grow a little bit more. There's still a little bit of space left. So we can make the cards not fixed, but we can make them flexbox themselves, because again, we can apply a different container layout. The cards are represented by groups. Groups are a container element in Bubble, and thus groups can have a container layout. So instead of fixed, we'll select column. Column would be the right choice because if you remember the original page, there was a header, a description, and an image all stacked on top of each other. So we need a column layout. And here we can remove the fixed width of this element, and this will make the element stretch as much as possible. It's only restricted by its parent element. Here you can see it, right? So in that case, this group here can shrink if we shrink the viewport width up to a minimum width of 250 pixels. And when it has reached that width, it will stop shrinking. Right? And we can apply the same setting to the other groups. Okay, so look what happens now. All the groups, each of them, is able to shrink down to 250 pixels in size. And if there's more space available, the groups will grow in order to take up this space, and they will grow at the same ratio, right? So each of the groups, each of the cards will have the same size here. And it even works for very small viewport widths. So I think this looks pretty great already. Okay, we can continue building the cards. So let's add 2 text elements and 1 image element. These elements are stacked on top of each other because we have selected the card to be a column layout. So we're going to change the dimensions of this image. We'll leave it at a fixed width. Let's see, also a fixed height. This should do it for now. And now we can start copying and pasting the text. This is going to be the title. And again, we are going to use Arial as a font family. Here 20 pixels for the title, and basically what we do with every text element, minimum width of 0 pixels, fitting the width to the content, and the minimum height of 0 pixels. All right, next element, minimum width 0 pixels. We'll fit the width to the content, and we'll make it the minimum height 0 pixels. So let's center this element here, also this one, but again, you won't be able to notice the difference because the text element already stretches along the width of the parent element here. But we can remove the styling and make the text centered inside of the text element itself. Okay. So we can rename the elements. I like to use the txt underscore prefix, and we'll make the font white. So now we are going to add some images, and I've created my own ones. So let's go to the file manager. I've uploaded them already, and I'm just going to copy the image address here. Let's also rename this element with the img prefix and add the URL as dynamic image. Right, so the dimensions, they are not right yet, so let's set a fixed width and height. This is the other way around. This looks great, and I've basically set up all my images with these dimensions. So that's not 100% the original page that we are trying to build, but at least it's consistent and it looks nice. Great. So we can also center this image. So let's simply add this. it's going to be 12 here and 20 there. Okay, and of course there needs to be some space between the text and the surrounding group. So we can do that by selecting the group and giving it some padding. We'll do 15 pixels. Just like that. Okay, let's go back and see how the original page behaves and looks like and whether we got everything right. Again, we don't want to do a one-to-one copy, but it should look at least a little bit similar. So let's see that we got all this responsiveness going on, and maybe we need a little bit more padding there, like that. And also I think we need to round the corners. So gotta remove the style here and apply some roundness. 10 pixels should do it. And well, then I think we can finally add the colors. So again, as you can see, there's some gradient to these cards. So we are going to open up the developer tools by pressing F12 again. And there we can select the elements, the cards, right? So we have selected this div here, this element, and over there we can see the CSS property called background, and this background determines, well, what color the background of this element is. And as you can see here, this is a linear gradient, and we can simply copy the hex value here and paste it in Bubble. Because in Bubble you also have the option to set your background as a gradient. So let's select gradient, then we can paste the hex value in as a starting color, and of course we also need to copy the other color here and paste it in Bubble. Then we can also determine the gradient's direction. So here we got 142 degrees, and this means a custom value over there, 142 degrees. Okay, looks pretty close. Now we have styled one card, and basically pretty much every other card looks exactly like that, at least from a basic point of view. Of course, it has different colors, different text, but the whole layout is the same. So what we are going to do is we are going to delete the other groups, because setting them up the same way as we just did is pretty time consuming. So we'll simply copy this one card we got here. So again, we need to reveal everything in the elements tree. Here we got it. So before we copy it, we need to make sure that the elements are properly named. And now we can just paste the element 5 times. So now we got 6 cards again, 6 groups, and we can start renaming those groups. We'll give each one the proper name. Alright, so now we can adjusting the texts or basically finalize the whole card. I'm just copying and pasting the text here from the original page. I'm not showing it. And also I can add the other pictures, the other URLs to the cards. So the image changes automatically as soon as I've added the other URL. And just like that, I'm adjusting the contents and the naming of the other cards and elements. Going back to the file manager, copying the URL, and voila, the image has changed. And as you can see, I'm trying to be consistent in naming these elements. So usually, for example, with text elements, I have this txt prefix. And for groups, I have this GRP prefix, for images, IMG. So this is my personal best practice in order to be consistent here. Right, a few more URLs here. And we are pretty close to being done. But of course, we also need the colors. So again, I'm just copying and pasting from the original site. I'm not showing it in order to save some time here. And again, I'm trying to go for a pretty similar look to the original page, but I'm not trying to copy or rebuild it one to one. Okay, it looks like we are pretty much done here. So let's check it out in the preview. So we're gonna go smaller. And what happens here is that the cards, so the groups that represent the cards, they start to shrink when I go smaller, right? They start to shrink until they can't shrink anymore because they have a fixed minimum width, and then there's a line break. So as soon as there are only 2 cards in a line, they grow as much as possible, but again, they will shrink when I go smaller. One thing that doesn't look quite right here is the fact that here this card has a smaller height than this card here, and this is because the text in this card is longer than the other one. So we got a line break in the text, which makes the whole card higher than the other one. So we need to fix that. And well, luckily there is a setting in Flexbox that allows us to do that. So let's select this group here, go to Layout, and here we can determine the vertical alignment. So please keep in mind that in this GRP perks group here, so this is the group that contains all those cards, all these other groups. The container layout of this group is set to row, and that means the vertical alignment is the alignment along the cross axis, which is the vertical axis, and we can stretch the groups along the vertical axis. So just like that. And as you can see here, each group, each card takes up all the available space along the vertical axis, which leads to the card being as high as the other ones. So we will simply apply this setting to every other card too. And this fixes this issue. So everything should now behave just fine. Let's see, cards shrink, and every card has the same size. And there are line breaks, so again, if I go smaller, the cards will shrink until only one card fits in a line. And again, these cards will shrink too, but not more than below 320 pixels, or the cards could go lower than 320 pixels. They could go until 250 pixels, which is the minimum width of the cards, but the page itself has been set to a minimum width of 320 pixels. So yeah, I would say that looks pretty good for the mobile view. It's fully responsive, right? I can go as large as I want. And well, I think that's it for now. Next thing would be the section with the call to action here, but I think that's something that we will have a look at in the next video. So again, we've covered a lot of ground. There was no theory today, just applications of what we've learned, and we've built upon the foundation that we have created in the first video, and we've done some pretty advanced stuff, I would say, in this middle section with all the cards aligning perfectly. In the next video, we are going to tackle the section at the bottom of the page where we have this call to action and the two different buttons, and I'm already looking forward to that, and I hope you are too. So if you liked what you saw and if you don't want to miss another video, then please subscribe to my channel and give this video a like. Thank you.